Adelaide Hayes's trembling hands counted the 12 copper coins for the 5th time that morning. 12 cents. That was all that stood between her 4-year-old daughter Lily and starvation. The little girl lay limp in her arms, so light now that Adelaide could barely feel her weight. 6 days without food had stolen the color from Lily's cheeks and the strength from her tiny body. The January rain fell in icy sheets around them as Adelaide stood in Riverbend Cemetery, her back to her husband's grave. Joshua Hayes had been dead for 3 months, claimed by what the mining company called an accident. Adelaide knew better than to ask questions, especially after the company had thrown them out of their company housing the day after the funeral. "Housing is for working families," the foreman had said, not meeting her eyes. "I cannot bring her to you today," Adelaide whispered, her words carried away by the wind. "Give me one more chance, please." Lily hadn't cried since yesterday, and that silence terrified Adelaide more than any scream ever could. The child's eyes, once bright blue, like her father's, had taken on a vacant, faraway look. Her breathing had grown shallow, her small chest barely rising beneath the threadbare coat that had once belonged to the daughter of Adelaide's former employer. Adelaide had sold everything else: her wedding ring, Joshua's pocket watch, even her winter coat. The 12 cents in her palm were the last remnants of a life that had crumbled like the walls of the mine that had claimed her husband. She pulled Lily closer, trying to shield her from the rain with her own body. The child's skin felt cool to the touch, her temperature dropping despite Adelaide's desperate attempts to keep her warm. "Just a little longer, my love," she whispered into her daughter's limp hair. "Mama's going to get you something to eat." The main street of Riverbend, Colorado, stretched before them as Adelaide made her way from the cemetery, mud clinging to her worn boots. The town had sprung up around the Blue River Mine 20 years earlier, its fortunes rising and falling with the price of silver and gold. These days, the mine was the only thing keeping the town alive, its citizens dependent on the company for everything from jobs to housing. Pierce's General Store stood at the center of town, its windows glowing with warm lamplight against the gray January day. Adelaide paused outside, watching the people inside moving about their business, buying bread and milk, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Through the foggy glass, she could see Martha Pierce behind the counter, her stern face creased in a perpetual frown as she counted the day's earnings. Adelaide's reflection stared back at her from the window, hollow-cheeked dark circles under her eyes, her once lustrous brown hair hanging in damp strings around her face. She barely recognized herself. 3 months ago, she had been the wife of a respected miner living in a small but comfortable company house, her days filled with the simple pleasures of tending to her home and child. Now she was a ghost, haunting the edges of Riverbend, whispers following her wherever she went. "Poor woman," they said. "Such a shame about her husband." But none of them had offered help when she'd gone door to door looking for work. No one wanted to hire a desperate woman with a sickly child in tow. Taking a deep breath, Adelaide pushed open the door of Pierce's General Store. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully, announcing her presence. Immediately, she felt the weight of disapproving stares. The warmth hit her like a physical force, and for a moment, she almost collapsed from the relief of it. Martha Pierce looked up from her ledger, her cold eyes holding no sympathy as they swept over Adelaide's bedraggled form and the motionless child in her arms. The other customers, well-dressed townspeople with full bellies and warm coats, turned to stare at the spectacle. We don't give charity here," Martha said before Adelaide could even speak. "Hard work is what builds character, not handouts." Adelaide's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Please, ma'am, my little girl hasn't eaten in 6 days. I have 12 cents. Maybe some breadcrumbs or— Her words died as Martha's expression hardened further. 12 cents won't buy much, and I've got a business to run, not a soup kitchen. Adelaide heard the whispers cutting through the air like knives. Look at the state of her. Shouldn't have children if you can't feed them. Or heard her husband died of some strange fever, not the mine accident like they claimed. Could be carrying disease, her and the child both. Each word was a fresh wound, but Adelaide held Lily tighter and stood her ground. I'll work for food. I can clean sew anything you need. Martha shook her head firmly. I won't enable laziness. There's always work for those willing to find it. The lie stung because Adelaide had tried everywhere, even offering to clean the saloon floors at night while Lily slept in a corner. Please, Adelaide whispered again, feeling Lily's breathing grow more labored against her chest. She's dying. Martha's face remained impassive. That's not my concern. Now, if you're not buying anything with those 12 cents, I'll have to ask you to leave. You're disturbing my customers. The store's bell chimed again, and this time the entire room seemed to shift. Even the whispers stopped. A massive shadow fell across the doorway as a man stepped inside, and Adelaide had never seen anyone quite like him. He stood at least 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to fill the frame completely. His weathered hands looked like they could break steel, yet he moved with surprising grace. Deep lines etched his face, speaking of years spent under the harsh sun, and his gray eyes held the kind of quiet strength that made even strong men step aside. His dark coat was dusted with snowflakes that hadn't yet melted, suggesting he'd ridden in from somewhere distant. Sheriff Maxwell, who had been leaning against the counter with his coffee, suddenly straightened up. Nathaniel Redwood, he said with a mix of surprise and wariness, didn't expect to see you back in these parts. The tall man Nathaniel nodded once, but said nothing. His gaze swept the room, taking in the scene with those storm-gray eyes that seemed to see everything. Adelaide felt his attention settle on her and Lily, and something in his expression changed. The hard lines around his eyes softened just slightly, and she saw him swallow hard as he looked at Lily's pale, motionless form. For a long moment, nobody moved. The store held its breath as this mountain of a man studied the dying child in her mother's arms. Martha found her voice first, perhaps emboldened by having an audience. Redwood, she said, her tone dripping with false sweetness, what brings you back to Riverbend? It's been, 6 years? But Nathaniel's eyes never left Lily's face. Adelaide watched as his massive hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and she could have sworn she saw his jaw tremble. Sheriff Maxwell cleared his throat and addressed Adelaide with false authority. Ma'am, I've been meaning to have a word with you about your situation. A child needs proper care, and if you can't provide it— He let the threat hang in the air. Adelaide knew what he meant. The county orphanage would take Lily away from her, and children who went there rarely came back to their parents. Don't, Adelaide whispered, her voice breaking. Please, don't take her from me. She's all I have left. Lily's breathing grew more shallow, and Adelaide felt panic rising in her chest like floodwater. This was it. This was how she would fail her daughter completely. That's when Nathaniel Redwood stepped forward. His boots struck the wooden floor with purpose, and the sound seemed to echo through the silent store. He stopped directly in front of Martha, his presence commanding the room without him having to raise his voice. When he finally spoke, his words came out deep and measured like thunder rolling across distant mountains. How much for everything she needs? Martha blinked in surprise. What? Food, milk, medicine, whatever it takes. His voice carried an authority that brooked no argument. How much? The store owner stammered clearly, caught off guard. Well, that would be— But Nathaniel Redwood wasn't looking at her anymore. His storm-gray eyes had fixed on Lily's pale face again, and Adelaide saw something impossible happening. There was a flash of pain in those eyes, so raw and personal that it took her breath away. Without another word, Nathaniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a leather wallet thick with bills. Adelaide's eyes widened. She hadn't seen that much money since Joshua was alive. "Everything," he said, simply, his deep voice filling the quiet store. "Milk, bread, medicine, for fever blankets, whatever a child needs." He counted out bills onto the counter, more money than Adelaide had seen in months. "And don't shortchange her because you think she doesn't deserve it." Martha's face turned red, but she didn't dare argue. Not with Nathaniel Redwood. Everyone in the county knew his name, though few knew his story. Adelaide watched in amazement as the woman who had refused her 12 cents now scrambled to fill a basket with food, milk, and supplies. The other customers stood frozen, watching this scene unfold like they were witnessing a miracle. Sheriff Maxwell shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Nathaniel, you don't want to encourage." But one look from the giant man silenced him completely. Adelaide held Lily closer, afraid to hope, afraid to believe this was really happening. Men didn't just help strangers without wanting something in return. She had learned that harsh lesson many times over the past 3 months. "Come," Nathaniel said quietly to Adelaide, picking up the heavy basket like it weighed nothing. "Your daughter needs to eat." His voice was gentle now, nothing like the commanding tone he'd used with Martha. Adelaide followed him outside on unsteady legs, Lily still limp in her arms. The rain had turned to soft snow, large flakes drifting down from the leaden sky. He led her to a wagon hitched with 2 strong horses, then gently helped her climb up to the seat. His hands were careful, respectful, never lingering longer than necessary. Once she was settled, he reached into the basket and pulled out a small bottle of milk. "Try to get her to drink," he said softly. "Just a little at first. Too much, too quickly, will make her sick." Adelaide's hands shook as she brought the bottle to Lily's pale lips. For a terrifying moment, her daughter didn't respond. Then, as if some deep instinct awakened, Lily's mouth moved weakly against the bottle. She managed only a few sips before exhaustion claimed her again, but those few drops were like watching someone come back from the dead. "Thank you," Adelaide whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to repay you for this kindness." Nathaniel had climbed up to the driver's seat, but he didn't take the reins immediately. Instead, he studied her with those storm-gray eyes, as if trying to solve some puzzle written in her face. "My name is Nathaniel Redwood," he said finally. "I own a ranch about 10 miles from here along Blue River. It's a good place, quiet and safe." Adelaide nodded, still not understanding where this was leading. "I'm Adelaide Hayes, and this is Lily. We're grateful for the food, Mr. Redwood, more than you'll ever know." "Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully, "when was the last time your daughter had a proper meal or slept in a real bed?" The questions weren't accusations, just gentle observations that cut straight to her heart. "3 months ago, when my husband died," she answered honestly. There was no point in lying to this man who had already seen her at her lowest moment. "We've been living wherever we could find shelters since then." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, his large hands gripping the reins without urging the horses forward. Snow gathered on the brim of his hat and on his broad shoulders as he seemed to weigh some heavy decision. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that suggested he understood more about loss than most people. "My ranch has plenty of room, good food, warm beds. Safety for you both. It's no place for a child to go hungry or without proper shelter." Adelaide's heart began to race, but not with hope, with fear. She had heard stories about men who preyed on desperate women, who offered help with hidden costs. "What would you want in return?" she asked quietly, pulling Lily closer against her chest. The question seemed to surprise him. He turned to look at her fully, and she saw something in his eyes that took her breath away, not anger at her suspicion, but understanding. "Nothing in return, Mrs. Hayes," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'm offering shelter, nothing more. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door. You can leave whenever you wish." He paused, then added, "I know what it's like to watch someone you love slip away while you stand helpless. I wouldn't wish that on anyone." Adelaide looked down at Lily, who had managed to take a few more sips of milk and was showing the faintest hint of color in her cheeks. The snow was falling harder now, the temperature dropping with the afternoon light. They had been sleeping in an abandoned shed behind the livery, but it offered little protection against the winter cold. Another night, there might be Lily's last. "Why would you help strangers?" she asked, needing to understand. "Because 6 years ago, I stood at the edge of Blue River, ready to walk into its waters, and not come back." He said, his voice so quiet, she almost missed it beneath the sound of the falling snow. "A stranger pulled me back, gave me shelter for the night. I never knew his name, but I'm alive today because of the kindness of a stranger." Lily stirred slightly in her arms, and for the first time in days, she opened her eyes. They were still weak and unfocused, but they were open. Adelaide felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked away since the day they buried Joshua. Nathaniel seemed to take her silence as hesitation. "You don't have to decide right now," he said gently. "But your choices are few, and the snow's coming down harder. At least, let me take you somewhere warm for tonight." Adelaide looked at this mysterious man who had appeared like an answer to her desperate prayers. Everything logical told her to be afraid to question his motives to protect herself and Lily from potential danger. But as she looked down at her daughter's face, seeing the first spark of life she'd witnessed in days, she realized that the greatest danger wasn't trusting the stranger. The greatest danger was doing nothing at all. "Yes," she whispered to Nathaniel Redwood. "We'll come with you." He simply nodded and clicked his tongue to the horses. The wagon rolled forward, carrying them away from the judgmental stares of River Bend and into the open country beyond. Adelaide had lived in the mining town her whole life, but as they traveled deeper into the forested hills, she saw a landscape that took her breath away. Snow-dusted pine forests stretched on either side of the narrow road, the trees standing like silent sentinels against the graying sky. In the distance, snow-capped peaks touched the horizon like fingers reaching toward heaven. Lily dozed fitfully against her chest, but even in sleep, Adelaide could see her daughter was stronger than she had been that morning. The milk was working its magic, bringing life back to her tiny body, one sip at a time. Nathaniel drove in comfortable silence, occasionally glancing over to check on them, but never pressing for conversation. Something about his quiet presence made Adelaide feel safer than she had in months. "People in town," she ventured after they'd been traveling for nearly an hour. "They seemed afraid of you." Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands tighten slightly on the reins. "People fear what they don't understand, and they don't try to understand what they fear." "What don't they understand about you?" He was quiet for so long that Adelaide thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally did, his voice had dropped even lower. "Loss changes a man, the way he sees the world, the way the world sees him." They crested a hill, and Nathaniel pointed ahead to a valley nestled between two forested slopes. "There," he said simply. "Home." Adelaide squinted through the falling snow, and felt her heart skip a beat. The Redwood Ranch wasn't a rough cabin as she had expected. It was a proper home 2 stories tall with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides and smoke curling from the chimney. A large barn stood nearby, along with what looked like a workshop and several outbuildings. The entire property was nestled in a protective curve of the Blue River, which flowed wide and dark against the snowy landscape. But as they drew closer, Adelaide began to notice things that made her stomach tighten with a mixture of sadness and understanding. In the front yard, almost hidden by snow, sat a small wooden swing. The ropes were frayed from weather, and no child had used it in a very long time. Near the porch steps, she could make out what might have been a garden in warmer months, with small paths winding between plots sized for a child's feet. Most telling of all was the small family cemetery she glimpsed at the edge of the property beneath a massive oak tree. 2 stones stood side by side, surrounded by what looked like a garden of wildflowers, now dormant under the snow. Nathaniel saw her looking, and his jaw tightened. "My wife and daughter," he said, simply offering no further explanation as he guided the wagon to the front of the house. He helped Adelaide down with the same careful respect he had shown in town, then carried the basket of supplies up the porch steps. The front door was solid oak carved with a pattern of pine branches that spoke of skilled craftsmanship. Nathaniel pushed it open and stepped back to let them enter first, like he was afraid to intrude on the home he himself owned. Adelaide stepped inside, Lily still cradled in her arms, and felt warmth wash over her like a physical embrace. The inside of the house made Adelaide's breath catch in her throat. Everything was clean and well-maintained, but it felt frozen in time, like a photograph of a life that had stopped suddenly. The main room held a large stone fireplace with a fire already burning low, comfortable chairs, and a sofa arranged around it. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with volumes that suggested Nathaniel was a far more educated man than his rough exterior might indicate. In the adjacent dining room, a table was set for 3 people, though the settings were covered with a thin layer of dust that suggested they had been waiting for a family dinner that would never come. Children's books were stacked neatly on a small table in the corner, and on the mantel above the fireplace sat a photograph that made Adelaide's heart break. The woman in the picture had kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding a little girl who looked to be about 5 years old. She had her father's gray eyes and her mother's delicate features, and both she and her mother looked at the camera with the confidence of people who believed they had all the time in the world. Nathaniel stood behind them in the portrait, his hand resting protectively on his wife's shoulder, and his face held a happiness that was completely absent now. "Mary and Emma," he said softly, following her gaze to the portrait. "Fever took them 6 years ago. It swept through the valley that spring." His voice was barely a whisper, heavy with a guilt that no amount of time seemed to ease. Adelaide shifted Lily in her arms and nodded, not knowing what to say. There were no words that could take away that kind of pain, but she understood it better than most. The sudden, devastating loss of everything that mattered was something they both carried. Nathaniel cleared his throat and seemed to shake himself back to the present. "You must be tired," he said, his voice stronger now. "Let me show you where you can rest." He led them upstairs to a guest room that was clearly meant for visitors, with a comfortable bed and clean linens. Adelaide noticed how he deliberately avoided looking at a door at the end of the hall, which remained firmly closed. "This is your room," he said, setting the basket of supplies down on a small table. "There's a lock on the door." He pointed to a solid brass bolt. "The washroom is across the hall. I'll bring up some hot water and something more substantial for your daughter to eat once she's ready." Adelaide nodded, overwhelmed by his consideration. "Thank you, Mr. Redwood." "Nathaniel," he corrected gently. "Just Nathaniel." After he left, Adelaide sat on the edge of the bed, Lily still in her arms. For the first time in months, they were warm, safe, with food and shelter secured for at least the night. The relief was so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Lily, my love," she whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead, which felt warmer now, more alive. "We're going to be all right." Lily's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her mother's face for the first time in days. "Hungry, Mama," she whispered, her voice thin but unmistakably present. Adelaide laughed through her tears, the sound strange and unfamiliar after so many weeks of silence and fear. "Yes, my darling, we're going to get you something to eat. And then you can sleep in a real bed tonight." As promised, Nathaniel returned with hot water for washing and a tray bearing a small bowl of broth and some soft bread soaked in milk. "Start with this," he advised. "Her stomach won't be ready for much more yet." He disappeared again, while Adelaide helped Lily wash her face and hands, then fed her small spoonfuls of the warm broth. The child managed to eat about half the bowl before her eyes grew heavy again. "Sleep now, my brave girl," Adelaide murmured as she tucked Lily into the bed. The child was asleep almost instantly, her breathing deeper and more regular than it had been in days. Only when she was certain Lily was settled did Adelaide allow herself to think about their situation. They were in the home of a man she had met just hours ago, a man who clearly carried his own heavy burdens. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, at least her daughter was safe. That would have to be enough. Adelaide slid the brass bolt into place, securing their door for the night, then lay down beside Lily, listening to the sound of her daughter's breathing, the soft crackling of the fire downstairs, and somewhere in the distance, the steady murmur of the Blue River flowing past the house that had just become their sanctuary. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks from town, erasing the path that had led them to this strange new refuge, and the even stranger man who had offered it. That evening, Adelaide woke to the sound of Lily's voice, stronger than it had been in weeks. "Hungry again, Mama?" Adelaide smiled in the dim light of their room. "That's a good sign, my love. Let's go downstairs and see if we can find something more for you to eat." She lifted the bolt on their door and guided Lily down the wooden staircase, one careful step at a time. The child was weak but determined, her small hand gripping the railing as they made their way to the main floor. They found Nathaniel in the kitchen, his large frame bent over the stove where a pot of something delicious-smelling simmered. He looked up at their approach, surprise crossing his features before he schooled them into a careful neutrality. "She's hungry again," Adelaide explained, helping Lily into a chair at the kitchen table. Nathaniel nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. "That's good. Her body is remembering what it needs." He ladled some soup into a bowl and set it in front of Lily, along with a small piece of bread. "Careful now. It's hot." Adelaide sat beside her daughter, watching as Lily took her first spoonful of soup, then another. The child's movements were slow and deliberate, but there was strength returning to her small body. "It's good," Lily whispered, looking up at Nathaniel with something like wonder in her eyes. "Thank you, mister." A shadow of pain crossed Nathaniel's face so quickly that Adelaide almost missed it. He turned back to the stove, his broad back to them, and for a moment his shoulders seemed to tremble. "You're welcome, little one," he said, his voice rough with emotion he was clearly trying to control. Adelaide felt something twist in her chest. Not fear this time, but a strange kinship with this solitary man, who seemed so affected by her daughter's simple gratitude. She wondered how long it had been since a child's voice had filled this kitchen, since he had cooked for someone other than himself. After dinner, as Lily dozed by the fire in the main room, Adelaide insisted on cleaning up the kitchen. It was the least she could do, she told Nathaniel, who reluctantly agreed to let her help. As they worked side by side, Adelaide washing dishes, Nathaniel drying them with careful, methodical movements, she found herself studying him from the corner of her eye. In the warm light of the kitchen lamps, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against the sun. His hands, though large and work-roughened, moved with a surprising gentleness as he handled the dishes. Most striking were his eyes, gray as the winter sky, but with depths that seemed to hold both storms and stillness. "You said fever took your family," she said quietly, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Lily. "Was it 6 years ago?" Nathaniel nodded, his movements never faltering, as he continued to dry a plate with methodical care. "Spring of '93. It started in town, then spread to the outlying farms. Doctor couldn't do anything. Nobody could." "I'm sorry," Adelaide said, meaning it with her whole heart. "Lily's father, my husband Joshua, died 3 months ago. The company said it was a mining accident, but—" She trailed off, uncertain how much to reveal. "But," Nathaniel prompted, his eyes meeting hers for the first time since they'd begun their task. Adelaide hesitated. "There were rumors that it wasn't an accident at all, but some kind of illness. The other miners avoided me after the funeral. The company doctor came and burned some of our things. They said it was standard procedure, but—" She shook her head. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Nathaniel's expression darkened. "The mining company has never been known for its honesty." "Did you work for them?" she asked, noticing how his jaw tightened at the mention of the company. "Once," he said shortly. "A lifetime ago." They finished the dishes in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Adelaide found herself wondering about the closed door upstairs, about the life Nathaniel had lived, before loss had reshaped him. But she didn't ask. Everyone had rooms in their lives they kept locked, memories too painful to revisit. After putting the last dish away, Nathaniel disappeared into another room and returned with something in his hands. Adelaide watched in amazement as he sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of wood and a small knife, his massive fingers working with surprising delicacy. Slowly a shape began to emerge from the wood-smooth curves that looked like they might become a small horse. "What are you making?" Adelaide asked softly, not wanting to wake Lily. Nathaniel glanced at her sleeping daughter, and something in his expression softened. "A horse," he said simply. "Every child should have something to hold on to when the world feels too big." Adelaide felt tears spring to her eyes at the kindness of this gesture, but also at the pain behind it. She wondered if he had carved toys for his daughter Emma, if his hands remembered the joy of creating something beautiful for a child to love. As Nathaniel's knife continued to shape the small horse, Adelaide found herself studying this complicated man who had saved them. He was clearly capable of living comfortably on his own, yet something in him had responded to their need with immediate, unhesitating generosity. He had opened his home to them without question, asking nothing in return except the chance to help someone as he himself had once been helped. But as she watched the firelight play across his weathered features, Adelaide realized something that made her pulse quicken with a mixture of hope and terror. This wasn't just about saving Lily anymore. Somehow, in the space of a single day, Nathaniel Redwood had begun to save her too. And that realization scared her more than all the hungry nights and cold mornings ever had. Because safety, she had learned, was often an illusion. And trusting in it, or in the people who offered it, was the quickest way to have it torn away again. Lily woke with a soft cry, her small body twitching in the throes of a nightmare. Adelaide was at her side, instantly gathering her daughter into her arms. "It's all right, my love. Mama's here," she whispered, rocking Lily gently. "You're safe now." Lily's eyes opened wild with fear at first, then gradually focusing on her mother's face. "We're not in the cold place. No, darling. We're somewhere warm and safe." Adelaide brushed the hair from Lily's forehead. "Do you remember the nice man who helped us? This is his home, and he's letting us stay here." Lily's gaze drifted to Nathaniel, who had remained at the table, his carving forgotten in his hands. "The big man," she said solemnly. "He gave me soup." A ghost of a smile touched Nathaniel's lips. "That's right, little one. And there's more where that came from when you're hungry again." Lily yawned, her small fingers clutching at Adelaide's sleeve. "I like it here, Mama."
Can we stay?
The innocent question hung in the air between the three of them. Adelaide looked at Nathaniel, uncertain how to answer. "For as long as you need," he said quietly, his eyes meeting Adelaide's over Lily's head. "This house has been too empty for too long." Later that night, as Adelaide lay beside Lily in the guest-room bed, she listened to the soft sounds of the house settling around them. The distant murmur of the river, the occasional creak of timber adjusting to the cold, the soft whisper of snowflakes against the window glass. Somewhere down the hall, she could hear Nathaniel moving about his footsteps, careful and measured, as if trying not to disturb their rest. Then, something strange, a different set of footsteps, lighter, almost like a child's. Adelaide sat up in bed, her heart suddenly racing. She strained to hear more, but there was only silence now. She must have imagined it, she told herself, the stress and exhaustion of the past months playing tricks on her mind. She lay back down, pulling the warm quilt closer around her and Lily. Whatever ghosts haunted this house and its owner, they were benign compared to the very real demons they had left behind in River Bend. For tonight, at least, they were safe. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, sleep beckoned deep and dreamless, a luxury Adelaide hadn't known since Joshua's death. As she drifted off, her last conscious thought was of Nathaniel's hands carefully shaping the wooden horse for her daughter, his face softened by the firelight and by a kindness that had survived despite all he had lost. Perhaps there was hope for her, too, that grief wouldn't be the only thing to define the rest of her life. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the redwood ranch in a blanket of white, while inside, three broken souls began the slow, uncertain process of finding their way back to life. The morning light filtered through the curtains of the guest room, casting a golden glow across the bed where Adelaide and Lily slept. For the first time in months, Adelaide woke without the immediate grip of fear. The warmth of the bed, the solid roof above their heads, and the steady breathing of her daughter beside her combined to create a moment of peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. Lily stirred her small hand, reaching up to touch Adelaide's cheek. "Why are you crying, Mama?" Adelaide smiled through her tears, gathering her daughter close. "Because I'm happy, my love. Happy that you're feeling better." And Lily was better. Her eyes brighter, her skin warmer, the hollows in her cheeks already beginning to fill out after just one night of proper food and rest. It was amazing how quickly children could recover when given what they needed. "I'm hungry," Lily announced, sitting up in bed and looking around the unfamiliar room. "Is the big man going to give us more soup?" "His name is Mr. Redwood," Adelaide gently corrected, helping Lily out of bed. "And yes, I'm sure he'll have something for breakfast. But first, let's get you washed and dressed." They used the washroom across the hall, Adelaide marveling at the luxury of hot running water piped in from what must be a tank somewhere in the house. Nathaniel Redwood's home was far more modern than she had expected, with amenities she hadn't seen since leaving her parents' home to marry Joshua years ago. After washing, they made their way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and cooking to the kitchen. Nathaniel was already there, standing at the stove with his back to them. He turned at their approach, a spatula in his hand and a dish towel thrown over his shoulder, looking unexpectedly domestic for such a formidable man. "Good morning," he said, his deep voice softer than it had been yesterday. "I hope you slept well." "Better than we have in months," Adelaide admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." Nathaniel nodded, then turned back to the stove. "I've made oatmeal with apple for the little one. Best to keep things simple for her stomach. And there's coffee for you if you'd like." Adelaide helped Lily into a chair at the kitchen table, noting how Nathaniel had already set 3 places proper dishes, not the dusty ones from the dining room. He'd been up early, preparing for them. The thought warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the kitchen stove. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with Lily doing most of the talking as her energy returned. She asked Nathaniel about his horses, his chickens, whether he had any cats or dogs, and where the river went, if you followed it all the way to the end. He answered each question patiently, his deep voice warming slightly as Lily's innocent curiosity drew him out of his usual reserve. "Can I see the horses?" Lily asked, having finished most of her oatmeal. "I like horses." Nathaniel glanced at Adelaide, seeking her permission. "It's cold out, but the barn is warm. If your mother says it's all right, I could show you after breakfast." Adelaide nodded. "Just for a little while. You're still recovering, Lily." As they finished eating, Adelaide insisted on helping with the dishes again. Nathaniel acquiesced without argument, falling into the same rhythm they had established the night before. There was something comforting about working alongside him, about the quiet competence he brought to even simple domestic tasks. "The house is beautiful," Adelaide said as she dried a bowl. "You've maintained it well." A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face. "Mary would have wanted that. She put her heart into making this place a home." "How long were you married?" The question slipped out before Adelaide could stop herself. 10 years, he replied after a moment. "We came out here when there was nothing but a cabin on the property. Built the house together log by log." His hands stilled in the dishwater. "Emma was born right here in the kitchen during a snowstorm. The doctor couldn't make it through the pass." Adelaide could see at the younger Nathaniel, terrified, but determined, helping bring his daughter into the world. The image squeezed her heart. "Joshua and I were married 6 years, she offered. "Lily came along 2 years later. We had a small place in town, nothing like this, but it was home." Nathaniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "A home isn't about the size of the house." After the dishes were done, Nathaniel kept his promise to show Lily the horses. He found a small woolen coat that must have belonged to Emma, and helped Lily into it, the garment several sizes too big, but warm enough for the short walk to the barn. Adelaide wrapped herself in a shawl Nathaniel had offered, and they made their way across the snowy yard. The barn was indeed warm, filled with the comforting smells of hay and horses. 3 handsome animals occupied the stalls, their heads turning curiously as the visitors entered. Nathaniel led them to a gentle mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Daisy," he said, lifting Lily carefully so she could see over the stall door. "She's the gentlest horse on the ranch." Lily reached out a tentative hand, her eyes wide with wonder as the mare nuzzled her fingers. "She likes me, Mama." "She does indeed," Nathaniel said, and for the first time since they'd met him, Adelaide heard something like genuine pleasure in his voice. "Would you like to give her a treat?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, and Nathaniel showed her how to hold an apple slice flat on her palm. The child's delighted laughter as the horse's soft lips tickled her hand was the sweetest sound Adelaide had heard in months. As they explored the rest of the barn, meeting the other horses checking on the chickens in their attached coop, and discovering the barn cat and her 3 kittens nested in the hay. Adelaide couldn't help but notice how Nathaniel seemed to come alive around Lily. His movements became less stiff, his rare smiles lingered longer, and the shadows in his eyes receded somewhat in the face of her daughter's innocent enthusiasm. But she also noticed how deliberately he avoided looking at a small corner of the barn, where a child-sized saddle sat gathering dust, or how his voice caught when Lily asked about a tiny handprint pressed into the concrete near the barn door, alongside a larger one that must have been Emma's. When they returned to the house, Lily was tired, but happily so, her cheeks pink from the cold and her eyes bright with new experiences. Adelaide tucked her in for a nap, amazed at how much stronger her daughter seemed after just one day in Nathaniel's care. While Lily slept, Adelaide found herself drawn to explore more of the house that had become their temporary sanctuary. Nathaniel had gone to his workshop, giving her privacy she hadn't expected. She moved quietly through the main floor, taking in details she had been too overwhelmed to notice the previous day. The bookshelves in the main room held volumes on medicine, botany, animal husbandry, and literature. Shakespeare, Dickens, Whitman. Not the collection of a simple rancher, but of an educated man with varied interests. Family photographs lined the mantel. Nathaniel and Mary on their wedding day, Emma as an infant, the three of them in front of the newly completed house. In the dining room, Adelaide found herself drawn to a desk in the corner, its surface neat and organized. A ledger lay open, revealing carefully kept ranch accounts. Beside it sat a stack of papers that caught her eye, what looked like letters never sent. The top one, partially visible, began, "To the family of Michael Collins. I regret to inform you." She pulled her hand back, unwilling to invade Nathaniel's privacy further, but the glimpse was enough to raise questions. Who was Michael Collins, and why was Nathaniel writing to his family with regrets? Movement upstairs caught her attention, a soft sound like footsteps coming from down the hallway. But Lily was napping in the guest room, and Nathaniel was outside in his workshop. Adelaide climbed the stairs quietly, following the sound to the closed door at the end of the hall, the door Nathaniel always avoided looking at. She stood before it, her heart pounding inexplicably in her chest. Something about this door, about the silence that now emanated from behind it, made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She reached for the handle, then stopped herself. This was Nathaniel's home, and he had been nothing but generous and respectful to them. She had no right to intrude on whatever private grief lay behind this door. As she turned to go, she noticed something she had missed before a small picture frame hanging on the wall beside the door. Inside was not a photograph, but a child's drawing carefully preserved behind glass. It showed three stick figures, a tall man, a woman, and a small girl standing in front of a house with a river nearby. At the bottom, in careful childish script, was written, "My Family" by Emma Redwood, age 5. Adelaide felt her throat tighten with emotion. The drawing was dated just weeks before the fever had taken Emma and her mother. It was likely one of the last things the child had created. As she studied the drawing, Adelaide became aware of a presence beside her. She turned to find Lily standing there, looking up at the picture with curious eyes. "Mama, who drew that?" Lily asked, her voice still heavy with sleep from her nap. "A little girl who used to live here," Adelaide explained gently. "Her name was Emma." Lily nodded, as if this confirmed something she already knew. "She has yellow hair." Adelaide froze, her blood suddenly cold in her veins. "What did you say, Lily?" "Emma," Lily said simply. "She has yellow hair, like the sun." Adelaide knelt down to her daughter's level, taking Lily's small shoulders in her hands. "Lily, have you seen Emma? Has someone been talking to you?" Lily looked confused by her mother's intensity. "She was in my dreams, Mama. She showed me her toys." She pointed to the closed door. In there. She said I could play with them if I wanted. Adelaide felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter day outside. It was just a dream, my love, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Emma isn't here anymore. Lily frowned clearly, not believing her mother. She is too here. She told me she lives in the house forever. She pulled away from Adelaide's grip, heading back toward the guest room. I'm still sleepy, Mama. Adelaide watched her daughter go, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Lily had always had a vivid imagination, and dreams could be strange, especially when one was recovering from illness. But how had she known Emma's hair was yellow? None of the photographs Adelaide had seen showed Emma's hair color clearly. They were all the sepia tones of formal portraits. A floorboard creaked behind her, and Adelaide turned to find Nathaniel standing at the top of the stairs, his expression unreadable as he looked from her to the closed door and back again. I wasn't, Adelaide began, feeling caught in an act of trespass. It's all right, Nathaniel said, his voice oddly flat. You're curious. Anyone would be. He moved past her to stand in front of the door, his large hand resting on the wooden panel as if he might draw strength from it. This was Emma's room. I've kept it just as it was. He pulled a key from his pocket, an old-fashioned iron key that looked like it belonged to a much older house. Would you like to see? The offer surprised her. You don't have to. No, he interrupted gently. But perhaps I should. It's been 6 years and I haven't let anyone in. Not even myself most days. He unlocked the door and pushed it open, stepping back to allow Adelaide to enter first. She hesitated, then moved past him into the room beyond. Emma's bedroom was frozen in time, preserved exactly as a 5-year-old girl would have left it. A small bed with a patchwork quilt, a chest of toys, a bookshelf filled with children's stories. A rocking horse stood in one corner, and a child-sized table in another held drawing materials, paper-colored pencils, a small slate. On the walls hung more of Emma's artwork, scenes of ranch life, drawn with the earnest effort of a child trying to capture the world as she saw it. But what struck Adelaide most was how the room felt not musty or abandoned, but clean and cared for. Someone had been dusting in here, keeping the cobwebs at bay, ensuring that time did not diminish this memorial to a life cut short. You've kept it beautiful, she said softly, her heart aching for the man standing in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold into his daughter's room. Nathaniel nodded, his eyes fixed on the rocking horse. Mary made the quilt, stayed up nights for weeks to finish it for Emma's 5th birthday. His voice caught. She died 2 months later. Adelaide wanted to reach out to him to offer some comfort, but she wasn't sure it would be welcomed. This man's grief was still so raw, so present, despite the years that had passed. I know what people in town say, Nathaniel continued, still not entering the room. That I lost my mind after Mary and Emma died. That I talk to ghosts. That's why they look at me the way they do. And is it true? Adelaide asked gently. His eyes met hers, gray and fathomless. I don't know anymore. Sometimes at night, I hear her laughing. Emma, I mean. Just little echoes, like she's playing in the next room. He shook his head. The mind plays tricks when you've lost everything. Adelaide thought of Lily's words of Emma, with yellow hair showing her toys in dreams. She couldn't bring herself to mention it now, not when Nathaniel looked so vulnerable standing in the doorway of his daughter's preserved bedroom. Loss changes us, she said instead, echoing his words from their journey to the ranch. Sometimes I think I see Joshua in a crowd, or hear his voice calling me. Just for a second before reality returns. Nathaniel's expression softened slightly. Does it get easier, the missing them? Adelaide considered the question, wanting to be honest. Not easier, different, like a broken bone that heals but still aches when it rains. She glanced around the room again. But we learn to live with it, I think, to build something new around the broken places. Nathaniel nodded, then carefully closed the door, locking it again with the iron key. "Thank you," he said simply, though Adelaide wasn't sure what he was thanking her for. That evening after dinner, Nathaniel continued work on the wooden horse he was carving for Lily. The child sat beside him at the kitchen table, watching with fascination as his knife revealed the shape hidden within the wood. Adelaide worked nearby, mending one of Lily's dresses with needle and thread Nathaniel had provided from Mary's old sewing basket. The domestic scene would have seemed impossible just days ago when she and Lily were starving on the streets of River Bend. Yet here they were, warm and fed, engaged in the simple rituals of family life with this enigmatic man who had saved them. "Almost done," Nathaniel said to Lily, showing her how the wooden horse was taking shape. "Tomorrow we'll sand it smooth, and then you can help me paint it. What color would you like?" Lily considered this with the seriousness only a child can bring to such a question. "Brown with white spots," she decided. "Like Daisy." A smile touched Nathaniel's lips. "Dappled gray. That's what they call horses, with that coloring." "Dappled gray," Lily repeated, testing the words. "It's pretty." Adelaide watched their interaction, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the stove. Lily needed this, needed to see how a man could be gentle and kind, how he could create beauty with his hands instead of destruction. The men in River Bend had been harsh creatures shaped by the brutal work of the mines and the company's disregard for their humanity. Nathaniel Redwood was different. Despite his imposing size and the grief that had marked him so deeply, there was a fundamental gentleness to him that called to something in Adelaide she had thought was dead and buried alongside Joshua. Later, after Lily had been tucked into bed, Adelaide found herself sitting with Nathaniel on the front porch of the ranch house. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the black velvet of the sky like diamond dust. They sat in companionable silence, wrapped in blankets against the winter chill, listening to the distant murmur of the Blue River and the occasional hoot of an owl from the pine forest. "I've been wondering," Adelaide said, finally breaking the silence between them, "why you left River Bend. The way people reacted when you returned. It seemed like there was a story there." Nathaniel was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low, almost lost beneath the sound of the river. "After Mary and Emma died, I wasn't myself. Grief does strange things to a man's mind." He paused, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I was a doctor before. Did I mention that?" Adelaide shook her head, surprised despite the clues she had seen in his bookshelves and his careful tending of Lily. "No, you didn't? I came west after medical school thinking I'd make my fortune treating miners and their families. Met Mary in Denver, brought her out here when the mine was just getting started." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "She was a city girl used to fine things, but she never complained about the rough life here. Said all she needed was love and a roof that didn't leak." He fell silent again, lost in memory. Adelaide waited, giving him the space to continue or not, as he chose. "When the fever came through," he finally said, "I couldn't save them. My own wife and child and all my training was useless." His voice hardened. But that wasn't the worst of it. The mine had been cutting corners on safety, and men were getting sick from poor air quality down in the shafts. I tried to raise the alarm, documented the cases, wrote to the company headquarters. "What happened?" Adelaide prompted gently when he paused again. "They buried it, paid off officials, threatened workers who spoke up. Then, when the real fever hit town, they used it as cover. Any miner who died from the bad air in the shafts, they just claimed it was the fever, saved them from having to pay compensation to the widows. His hands clenched into fists. I couldn't keep silent, so they ruined me. Spread rumors that I was incompetent, that my treatments had killed patients rather than saved them. Adelaide felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. And people believed them. People believe what's convenient, Nathaniel said bitterly, especially when the alternative threatens their livelihood. The mine is the only employer in River Bend. No one could afford to side with me against the company. He looked out across the dark landscape. So I left, came back to the ranch, closed the door on the world. Until yesterday. Until us, Adelaide said softly. He nodded, his profile sharp against the starlit sky. Until you. The silence between them deepened, filled with unspoken questions. Adelaide found herself wondering if Joshua's death had truly been an accident, or if he too had been a victim of the company's negligence, his death conveniently attributed to a fever that may never have existed. The thought made her stomach clench with a mixture of grief and anger. I should have asked earlier, Nathaniel said, suddenly turning to face her. What are your plans, Mrs. Hayes, once Lily is fully recovered? The question caught Adelaide off guard. She hadn't thought beyond the immediate need to keep Lily alive. I don't know, she admitted. There's nothing for us in River Bend now, but I don't have the means to start over somewhere else. Nathaniel hesitated, then spoke carefully as if each word carried weight. You could stay here, both of you. The ranch is large enough and there's plenty of work I could use help with. He hurried on before she could respond. I'm not suggesting anything improper. You would have your privacy, your independence. He trailed off, looking away. The house has been empty too long. Adelaide felt her heart beating faster, though whether from hope or fear she couldn't say. Why would you do that? Take in strangers, give them a home. You're not strangers anymore, he said simply. And maybe I'm being selfish. Having you and Lily here, it's brought something back to this place that I thought was gone forever. He met her eyes again. But the choice is yours. No obligation, no expectations. Adelaide looked out at the stars, considering his offer. It was more than generous, it was life-changing. A safe home for Lily away from the poverty and judgment of River Bend. Work that would allow Adelaide to contribute to feel useful again. And Nathaniel himself, a good man, who had suffered as she had, who understood loss in a way few others could. But there were complications too. The town would talk if a widow and her child took up residence with a bachelor, no matter how innocent the arrangement. And there was something else, something that had been growing between them over the past 2 days, a warmth, a connection that went beyond simple gratitude or shared grief. It both attracted and terrified her. I need time to think, she said finally. This is a generous offer, and I'm grateful. But it's a big decision, especially for Lily. Nathaniel nodded, accepting her hesitation without apparent disappointment. Of course. There's no rush. You're welcome here for as long as you need, regardless of what you decide. They sat in silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts, while the river flowed on beneath the stars, its constant murmur, a reminder that life, like water, found ways to continue even after the most devastating storms. Later that night, Adelaide was awakened by Lily's voice. The child was sitting up in bed, apparently talking to someone, though they were alone in the room. Lily, Adelaide whispered, sitting up beside her daughter. Who are you talking to, love? Lily turned to her with wide, innocent eyes. Emma, Mama. She wants to show me something. The child pointed to the empty corner of the room. She says there's a secret in the house. Adelaide felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Lily, There's no one there. You were dreaming, darling. But Lily shook her head firmly. She's right there, Mama. With yellow hair and a blue dress. She wants us to help her daddy. She says he's sad because of the bad men. Adelaide gathered Lily close, her mind racing. This was more than a child's imagination or dreams. Lily was describing things she couldn't possibly know: Emma's appearance, the bad men who had ruined Nathaniel's reputation. What else does she say, Lily? Lily tilted her head, as if listening to something Adelaide couldn't hear. She says Daddy keeps writing letters but never sends them. She says the truth is in his doctor bag in the workshop. Lily frowned. What's a doctor bag, Mama? Adelaide's heart was pounding now. It's a special bag doctors use to carry their medicines and tools, she explained automatically, her mind still trying to process what was happening. Was Lily somehow picking up on conversations she'd overheard, or was something more inexplicable occurring? Emma says the bad men hurt her daddy, and now they were going to hurt you too. Lily continued, her small face serious in the moonlight filtering through the curtains. She says we need to be careful of the man with the angry eyes. What man, Lily? What angry eyes? Adelaide asked, a chill running down her spine. But Lily had already settled back against the pillows, her eyelids drooping. I'm sleepy now, Mama. Emma's going away. Adelaide held her daughter until Lily's breathing deepened into sleep, but her own mind would not quiet. Nathaniel had mentioned letters he'd written, but never sent letters of regret to families affected by the mine's negligence. And the man with angry eyes, could that be someone from River Bend? Someone connected to the mine? Or was this all just the product of her own fears, and Lily's vivid imagination fueled by their precarious situation and the strange, grief-haunted house they now found themselves in? Adelaide lay awake for hours, listening to the old house creak and settle around them, to the distant sound of the river, and once to what sounded like the soft laughter of a child from somewhere down the hallway, followed by the heavier tread of Nathaniel's footsteps above them. Whatever secrets the Redwood Ranch held, Adelaide had a growing certainty that they would not remain hidden much longer. And when they emerged into the light, the fragile peace they had found here might shatter forever. The following morning dawned clear and cold, the sun glinting off the snow-covered landscape like millions of tiny diamonds. Adelaide woke early, her mind still troubled by Lily's strange conversation with an invisible Emma the night before. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake her daughter, and made her way downstairs. She found Nathaniel in the kitchen already preparing breakfast. He looked up at her approach, a question in his eyes at her early appearance. Couldn't sleep, she explained, moving to help him with the coffee. Too much on my mind. He nodded, understanding without pressing for details. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the routine already feeling familiar, despite the short time they had known each other. I'd like to ask you something, Adelaide said, finally gathering her courage. About Emma. Nathaniel's hands stilled over the stove, his back to her, suddenly rigid with tension. What about her? Did she, after she passed, did you ever feel her presence in the house, as if she were still here somehow? He turned slowly to face her, his expression guarded. Why do you ask? Adelaide hesitated, unsure how to explain without sounding like she had lost her mind. Lily has been talking to someone she says is Emma, describing her yellow hair, blue dress, saying things she couldn't possibly know. She met his eyes directly. Last night, she said Emma told her that you keep writing letters but never send them, and that the truth is in your doctor bag in the workshop. The color drained from Nathaniel's face. He set down the spoon he had been holding, bracing himself against the counter, as if suddenly unsteady on his feet. That's impossible, he whispered. No one knows about those letters. and my medical bag has been locked away since I left practice." "I know it sounds crazy," Adelaide said, taking a step toward him, "but Lily has never been prone to making up stories like this. And the details, they're too specific." Nathaniel ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older and more tired. "There have been times," he admitted reluctantly, "when I thought I heard her. Emma, laughing, singing to herself down the hallway. I always told myself it was grief playing tricks on my mind. And the medical bag, what truth is in it?" He was silent for a long moment, conflict clear in his eyes. Finally, he said, "Records of the men who got sick in the mines, documented cases, dates, symptoms. Proof that the company knew about the bad air and did nothing." He shook his head. "But I never told anyone about those. Not even Mary knew I had kept them." Adelaide felt a chill run through her. "Lily also said Emma warned that the bad men who hurt you would try to hurt us too. She mentioned the man with the angry eyes." Now Nathaniel looked alarmed. "What man? Did she describe him?" "No, she fell asleep right after." "But Nathaniel, if what she's saying is real, if somehow Emma is communicating with her, then we might be in danger. Especially if there's evidence in your possession that could damage the mining company." He turned back to the stove, but Adelaide could see his mind was racing, calculating. "I never meant to involve you in this," he said finally. "I brought you here to keep you safe, not to put you in more danger." "I think we were already involved," Adelaide said quietly. "If Joshua's death wasn't really an accident, if the company was covering something up, then we were part of this before we ever met you." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, then nodded a decision apparently made. "After breakfast, I'll show you what's in the medical bag. You deserve to know, especially if it might affect you and Lily." They finished preparing breakfast in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. When Lily came downstairs a short while later, bright-eyed and hungry, they set aside the heavy conversation, focusing instead on the child's improving health and spirits. After they had eaten, Nathaniel suggested that Lily might like to help him feed the chickens and collect eggs. The child eagerly agreed, and Adelaide watched from the kitchen window as the two of them made their way across the snowy yard to the chicken coop beside the barn, Lily's small hand trustingly placed in Nathaniel's large one. There was something right about the image, something that made Adelaide's heart ache with both joy and fear. Joy at seeing Lily happy and cared for, fear at how quickly she had come to depend on this man and the safety he provided. Her mother had always warned her that a woman alone was vulnerable in ways that went beyond the physical, that grief and loneliness could lead to decisions based on need rather than clear judgment. But watching Nathaniel patiently show Lily how to scatter feed for the chickens, his face softened by the child's delight, Adelaide couldn't bring herself to regret the trust she had placed in him. Whatever dangers might lie ahead, they would face them together, three broken people who had somehow found each other in the midst of their separate sorrows. When Nathaniel and Lily returned rosy-cheeked from the cold and carrying a basket of fresh eggs between them, he caught Adelaide's eye over the child's head. A silent understanding passed between them. They would talk later when Lily was occupied elsewhere. That opportunity came after lunch, when Lily settled down for her afternoon nap, still needing extra rest as she recovered her strength. Nathaniel led Adelaide to his workshop, a separate building behind the main house that she had noticed but not yet entered. Inside the workshop was meticulously organized with tools hanging in precise order on the walls, and wood of various types stacked neatly in racks. A workbench dominated one end of the space, while a small potbelly stove provided warmth at the other. But what caught Adelaide's attention was a desk in the corner covered with papers and ledgers. clearly Nathaniel's office as well as his workshop. He moved to a large trunk beneath the desk and unlocked it with a key he kept on a chain around his neck. From inside, he withdrew a battered leather bag, the traditional Gladstone bag carried by physicians. The leather was cracked with age and used the brass fittings tarnished, but still solid. "I haven't opened this in 6 years," Nathaniel said, setting the bag on the desk. "Not since the day I walked away from medicine." He undid the clasp and opened the bag, revealing the tools of his former profession. Stethoscope, surgical instruments, glass bottles of medicines, bandages, all neatly arranged within. But beneath these, separated by a false bottom in the bag, was a stack of journals and loose papers. Nathaniel withdrew these and spread them on the desk. Adelaide moved closer, seeing page after page of careful notes in Nathaniel's precise handwriting, patient names, dates, symptoms, treatments, outcomes. Many of the entries were marked with a small red M in the margin. "The M stands for mine-related," Nathaniel explained, pointing to one such entry. "These were cases I suspected were caused by conditions in the mine, not natural illness. Respiratory problems, unusual rashes, neurological symptoms that didn't match any known disease." He flipped through the pages until he reached a section where the handwriting became more urgent, less precise. "This was the beginning of the end," he said grimly. "Men started dying. Young, healthy men who shouldn't have been vulnerable to the fever that was going around. I began to suspect their lungs had been damaged by something in the mine, making them unable to fight off the infection." Adelaide scanned the pages, her heart sinking as she recognized a name. "Thomas Wilkins," she said softly. "He lived next door to us. They said he died of the fever, too." Nathaniel nodded. "He was one of the worst cases. By the time they brought him to me, his lungs were already failing. But before he died, he told me something important." He pulled out a separate sheet of paper, a deposition signed by Thomas Wilkins and witnessed by Nathaniel. He was working in a new section of the mine where they'd discovered a rich vein of silver. But the air was bad, so bad that men were passing out at their posts. The foreman knew, but the company ordered them to keep digging. Adelaide felt sick. "How many died?" 12 that I documented for certain. Probably more. After I left." Nathaniel's voice was hard with suppressed rage. "I took these records to the company manager, then to the county officials. No one would listen. The mine was the lifeblood of Riverbend. No one wanted to believe it was also its poison." He pulled out one more document, a letter on official company stationery. "This came a week after I started asking questions. A formal complaint against me alleging medical malpractice. They claimed my treatments had worsened the fever, that I was responsible for the deaths." His laugh was bitter. "They even had testimonials from grateful patients who had recovered once they stopped following my advice." "And people believed this?" Adelaide asked, though she already knew the answer. The mining company held enormous power in a town like Riverbend. "Enough did," Nathaniel said wearily. "Or at least enough pretended to. I was already not myself. After losing Mary and Emma, it was easy to paint me as a grieving man who had lost his reason along with his family." He gestured to the pile of journals and letters. "I kept all of this thinking someday I might find the courage to fight again, but the years passed, and it seemed better to leave the past buried." Adelaide was quiet for a moment, absorbing everything she had learned. Then a terrible thought occurred to her. "Joshua," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was working in a new section of the mine before he died. He came home coughing for weeks, but he wouldn't stop working. We needed the money too badly." Nathaniel's expression softened with sympathy. The company said it was an accident. A cave-in, Adelaide confirmed. But they wouldn't let me see the body. Said it was too badly damaged. They gave me his personal effects in a bag and buried him the next day. She looked up at Nathaniel, a new fear taking hold. What if it wasn't an accident at all? What if he died from the same thing that killed Thomas Wilkins and the others? Before Nathaniel could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They both moved to the workshop window, peering out, to see a lone rider approaching the ranch from the direction of River Bend. "Sheriff Maxwell," Nathaniel said grimly, recognizing the visitor. "I doubt he's come all this way for a social call." Adelaide felt a stab of fear. "Do you think he knows we're looking at these records?" "Impossible," Nathaniel assured her. "But the fact that you and Lily are staying here might have raised questions in town." He gathered the documents, quickly returning them to the medical bag and locking it back in the trunk. "Let me handle this. Stay here until I come back." Adelaide nodded, watching through the window as Nathaniel strode across the yard to meet the approaching sheriff. Something about the way the two men faced each other, tension visible even at this distance, told her that the fragile peace they had found at the Redwood Ranch was about to be shattered. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard Lily's voice from the night before. "Emma says we need to be careful of the man with the angry eyes." Looking at Sheriff Maxwell's face as he dismounted, Adelaide couldn't help but notice how his eyes narrowed with barely concealed hostility as he confronted Nathaniel in the snowy yard. The peaceful interlude was over. The world had found them, and with it all the dangers they had briefly escaped. Adelaide watched from the workshop window as Nathaniel and Sheriff Maxwell stood facing each other in the snowy yard, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Though she couldn't hear their words, the tension in their postures was unmistakable. The sheriff's hand rested near his holster, not quite a threat, but a reminder of the authority he carried. After several minutes of conversation, Nathaniel gestured toward the main house, and the two men began walking in that direction. Adelaide hesitated, uncertain whether to remain hidden in the workshop as Nathaniel had instructed, or to join them. If the sheriff had come about her and Lily, she should be present for whatever was discussed. Decision made, she slipped out of the workshop and hurried across the yard, entering the house through the kitchen door. She could hear men's voices from the front room, Nathaniel's deep rumble, and Adelaide watched from the workshop window as Nathaniel and Sheriff Maxwell stood facing each other in the snowy yard, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Though she couldn't hear their words, the tension in their postures was unmistakable. The sheriff's hand rested near his holster, not quite a threat, but a reminder of the authority he carried. After several minutes of conversation, Nathaniel gestured toward the main house, and the two men began walking in that direction. Adelaide hesitated, uncertain whether to remain hidden in the workshop, as Nathaniel had instructed, or to join them. If the sheriff had come about her and Lily, she should be present for whatever was discussed. Decision made, she slipped out of the workshop and hurried across the yard, entering the house through the kitchen door. She could hear men's voices from the front room, Nathaniel's deep rumble and the sharper tones of Sheriff Maxwell. Adelaide paused in the hallway, listening. "Folks in town are talking, Nathaniel," the sheriff was saying. "A widow and her child staying here with you, no chaperone, no propriety. It doesn't look right." "I wasn't aware that offering shelter to a starving mother and child was a matter for the sheriff's office," Nathaniel replied, his voice controlled but with an edge of steel beneath. "Unless helping those in need has become a crime in River Bend." "Don't play dumb with me," Maxwell snapped. "You know exactly how this looks. Mrs. Hayes was Joshua's widow, and there are concerns about her situation." Adelaide stepped into the doorway, making her presence known. Both men turned toward her, Maxwell with surprise, and Nathaniel with a flash of concern quickly masked. "What concerns about my situation, Sheriff?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "I'd like to hear them directly." Maxwell shifted uncomfortably, his weathered face hardening as he regarded her. "Mrs. Hayes, I was just explaining to Mr. Redwood that your arrangement here has raised eyebrows in town." "My arrangement?" Adelaide moved further into the room, standing tall, despite her simple dress and the sheriff's intimidating presence. "You mean the fact that a kind man saved my daughter from starving to death when no one else in Riverbend would help us? That arrangement?" The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "There are proper channels for charity, Mrs. Hayes. Orphanages for children in need, workhouses for able-bodied adults. Places that would separate me from my daughter," Adelaide finished for him. "Is that what you came to suggest, Sheriff? That I should give up my child because the good people of Riverbend find it improper that we accepted help from Mr. Redwood?" Maxwell's jaw tightened. "It's not just about propriety. There are health concerns as well." Adelaide felt her blood run cold. "Health concerns?" "Your husband's death," Maxwell said bluntly. "There's been talk that it wasn't just a mining accident, that he might have been carrying something contagious." Nathaniel stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Adelaide and the sheriff. "That's a convenient story, isn't it? Sheriff blamed the dead man for carrying disease, instead of admitting the company's negligence." Maxwell's hand moved closer to his gun, his eyes hardening as they fixed on Nathaniel. "I didn't come here to rehash your accusations against the mine Redwood. That business was settled years ago." "Was it?" Nathaniel's voice was dangerously quiet. "Or was it just buried along with the men who died because the company valued profit over safety?" The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Adelaide found herself holding her breath, watching the two men square off like adversaries in a duel. Then a small voice broke the silence. "Mama." All three adults turned to see Lily standing at the bottom of the stairs, her small face puzzled as she took in the scene before her. Adelaide moved quickly to her daughter's side, drawing her close. "It's all right, my love. The sheriff was just leaving." Maxwell looked from the child to Adelaide, then to Nathaniel, something shifting in his expression. For a moment, he seemed almost uncertain, as if the sight of the little girl had reminded him of something beyond his official duties. "Not quite yet," he said, his tone softening slightly. "There's one more matter." He turned back to Nathaniel. "Thomas Hayes arrived in town yesterday, asking after his sister-in-law and niece." Adelaide felt her heart skip a beat. "Thomas Joshua's brother." The name came out as barely more than a whisper. Maxwell nodded. "He claims he's been searching for you since Joshua's death. Says he has legal papers regarding the child's guardianship." "That's impossible," Adelaide said, tightening her hold on Lily. "Thomas hasn't been in Riverbend for years. He and Joshua hadn't spoken since before we were married." "Well, he's here now," Maxwell said. "And he seems mighty concerned about his niece's welfare. Especially when he heard you were staying out here with—" He glanced at Nathaniel, leaving the implication hanging in the air. Lily pressed closer to Adelaide, her small face troubled. "I don't want to go with the angry man, Mama," she whispered. Adelaide looked down at her daughter in surprise. "You've never met your Uncle Thomas, Lily. How do you know he's angry?" "Emma showed me," Lily said simply. "In my dreams. She said he has angry eyes, and he wants to take me away." The sheriff frowned, looking from the child to Nathaniel with suspicion. "Emma? Who's Emma?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Nathaniel was the first to break it, his voice carefully measured. "My daughter. She passed away 6 years ago." Maxwell's expression darkened. "So the child is having dreams about your dead daughter Redwood. What kind of nonsense have you been filling her head with?" No one has filled her head with anything, Adelaide said defensively. Lily has never heard of Emma before coming here. The sheriff looked unconvinced. Regardless, Thomas Hayes is her blood relative, and he's expressed concern about her current living situation. He'll be coming out here tomorrow with the papers. He fixed his gaze on Adelaide. I suggest you prepare yourself, Mrs. Hayes. The law tends to favor blood relations in matters of guardianship, especially when the alternative is— His eyes flicked toward Nathaniel again, the implication clear. After the sheriff had gone, Adelaide sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Lily had been sent outside to feed the chickens again, with Nathaniel keeping a watchful eye on her from the porch, giving Adelaide a moment alone with her thoughts. Thomas Hayes, Joshua's younger brother, whom she had met only twice at their wedding, and once when he'd passed through town 3 years ago asking Joshua for money. He had never shown any interest in Lily, had never sent so much as a letter after Joshua's death. And now he suddenly appeared, claiming guardianship rights. It didn't make sense. Unless— Adelaide thought back to what Nathaniel had shown her in his medical bag, the evidence of the mine's negligence, the cover-up of miners' deaths. If Joshua had died, not from an accident, but from the same lung sickness that had claimed others, if the company was still hiding the truth. A cold certainty settled in her stomach. Thomas wasn't here out of familial concern. He was here as part of the cover-up. The door opened, and Nathaniel stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. His face was grim as he joined her at the table. "Lily's fine," he said, answering her unspoken question. "She's made friends with the barn cat." He hesitated, then added, "Adelaide, there's something you should know about Thomas Hayes." "He's working with the mining company," she said flatly. "Isn't he?" Nathaniel looked surprised, then nodded slowly. "I can't prove it, but yes, I believe so. When I was gathering evidence about the miners' deaths, I heard rumors that Thomas was seen meeting with the company manager in Denver. Some suggested he was paid to keep quiet about conditions in the mine." "But what does that have to do with Lily?" Adelaide asked, fear making her voice shake. "Why would he come for her after all this time?" Nathaniel's expression darkened. "Control. If he has custody of Joshua's child, he has leverage over you. They can ensure your silence about whatever you might know or suspect about your husband's death." "I don't know anything," Adelaide protested. "Joshua never talked about problems in the mine. He just wanted to provide for us." "But you're asking questions now," Nathaniel pointed out gently. "And you're here with me, the one person in the county who has been publicly accusing the company of negligence for years." He reached across the table, hesitating, before covering her clasped hands with one of his own. "Adelaide, I'm so sorry. I never meant to bring this danger to your door. If you and Lily hadn't come here, perhaps Thomas would never have bothered you." Adelaide turned her hand to grasp his drawing strength from his solid presence. "If we hadn't come here, Lily would have died in the street, while the good people of River Bend looked the other way. I don't regret accepting your help, Nathaniel." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words, a recognition of shared purpose in the face of common enemies. "What do we do now?" Adelaide asked. "We fight," Nathaniel said simply. "Thomas may have legal papers, but they're worthless if we can prove he's acting as an agent of the company rather than out of concern for Lily." He squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "I still have friends in Denver, a lawyer who once helped me with my case against the mine. I'll send a telegraph today, ask him to look into Thomas's connections with the company." "And if that's not enough?" Adelaide couldn't keep the fear from her voice. Nathaniel's jaw set in a determined line. "Then we'll leave. Tonight, if necessary. I have enough money saved to get us to Denver, maybe all the way to California. Somewhere the mining company has no reach. Us, Adelaide repeated, her heart skipping a beat at the implication. Nathaniel's eyes softened as they met hers. If you'll have my company, I won't let them take Lily from you, Adelaide, and I won't let them silence the truth about what happened to Joshua and the others any longer. The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Nathaniel rode into the nearest town with a telegraph office, sending urgent messages to his lawyer friend in Denver. Adelaide packed a small bag with essentials for herself and Lily, ready to flee if Thomas's arrival the next day turned threatening. As she folded Lily's few clothes, the ones they had arrived in, plus some of Emma's old things that Nathaniel had offered, Adelaide tried to quiet the storm of emotions in her chest. Fear for Lily's safety warred with anger at Thomas's manipulation and the mining company's callous disregard for human life. And beneath it all, something else stirred, a warm, fragile feeling that bloomed whenever she thought of Nathaniel's promise, "I won't let them take Lily from you." In just a few days, this man had become their protector, their safe harbor. And if Adelaide was honest with herself, he was becoming something more, someone who made her think of possibilities beyond mere survival of a future that might hold joy again. When Nathaniel returned that evening, his expression was grim. "The telegraph went through," he reported as they sat at the kitchen table after Lily had been put to bed. "But my lawyer friend may not be able to get back to us before Thomas arrives tomorrow." Adelaide nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Then we should be prepared to leave." "Yes," Nathaniel agreed, "but not before we try one more thing." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a folded document. "I stopped by the county clerk's office as well, called in an old favor." He unfolded the paper, sliding it across the table to her. This is a report on the investigation into Joshua's death. The official one, not the story the company put out." Adelaide's hands trembled as she took the document. "How did you get this?" "The clerk's wife was one of my patients years ago. I saved her life during a difficult childbirth. He was willing to let me see the file when no one was looking." Nathaniel's voice was grim. "Read the section I've marked." Adelaide turned to the indicated page, her eyes scanning the clinical description of her husband's injuries. According to the report, Joshua had indeed died in a mine collapse, but there was more. Victim's lungs showed significant scarring and deterioration consistent with prolonged exposure to harmful gases. Medical examiner notes that these pre-existing conditions would have limited the victim's ability to escape the collapse. Recommendation: full investigation into air quality in Section 7 of the Blue River Mine. A handwritten note in the margin read simply, "Recommendation denied by order of company management. Case closed as accidental death. No further investigation authorized." Adelaide looked up, her eyes filling with tears of rage and grief. They knew the air was killing him, and they did nothing. Nathaniel nodded solemnly. "And now they're afraid you'll discover the truth and speak out. That's why Thomas is coming for Lily to silence you." "But why now? It's been 3 months since Joshua died." "Because you're here with me," Nathaniel explained. "They know I've been gathering evidence against them for years. They're afraid we'll put the pieces together." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "This report is the first concrete proof I've found that the company was actively suppressing investigations. It could be enough to reopen the cases of all the miners who died." Adelaide felt a cold determination replace her fear. "So we don't run. We fight." "Are you sure?" Nathaniel asked. "It could be dangerous." "I'm sure," Adelaide said firmly. "Joshua deserves justice. All those men do. And Lily deserves to know her father didn't die because of some random accident." but because of men who valued profit over human lives. Nathaniel's expression softened with admiration. "You're a brave woman, Adelaide Hayes." "I haven't been," she admitted. "Not until now. But seeing you stand up to them all these years, even when it cost you everything, it makes me want to be braver." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, the weight of their shared purpose seemed to pull them toward each other like gravity. Then, from upstairs came the sound of Lily's voice, calling out in her sleep. "Mama, the angry man is coming." Adelaide rushed upstairs, finding Lily sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear but unfocused, still half asleep. "It's all right, my love," she soothed, gathering her daughter close. "It was just a bad dream." But Lily shook her head frantically. "Not a dream. Emma showed me. The angry man is bringing other men too. With guns." She looked past Adelaide to where Nathaniel stood in the doorway. "They want to hurt you, Papa, Nathaniel." Adelaide felt her blood turn to ice at both the warning and the name Lily had given Nathaniel. Papa Nathaniel was what Emma had called him, according to the inscription on one of the drawings in Emma's room. How could Lily know that Nathaniel's face had gone pale? "When are they coming, Lily?" he asked gently, moving to kneel beside the bed. "Did Emma tell you?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Tomorrow, but not when the sun is up. When it's dark. They're going to pretend to come in the morning, but they're really coming tonight." Her small face crumpled with worry. "Emma says we need to hide." Adelaide and Nathaniel exchanged a look over Lily's head. Whether her daughter's dreams were just imagination or something more inexplicable, they couldn't afford to ignore the warning. "We'll be ready." Nathaniel promised, his voice gentle but determined. "No one is going to hurt you or your mama." After Lily had been calmed and had fallen back asleep, Adelaide and Nathaniel retreated downstairs to plan. If Thomas and his men were truly coming tonight, rather than the next morning, as the sheriff had said, they needed to be prepared. "I have a hunting rifle and a revolver," Nathaniel said, his expression grim as they sat at the kitchen table. "But I'd rather avoid a direct confrontation if possible. Violence will only give them more ammunition against us." "What about the evidence in your medical bag?" Adelaide asked. "If they're coming tonight, they might be planning to search the property, destroy anything that could incriminate the company." Nathaniel nodded already ahead of her. "I've moved it from the workshop to a hiding place in the house, but we should move it again somewhere they wouldn't think to look." He hesitated, then said, "There's a loose floorboard in Emma's room under the bed. Mary used to hide birthday presents there. No one would think to search there." Adelaide understood the significance of him offering this sanctuary, a place he had preserved untouched for 6 years, now opened to protect their future. "I'll hide the documents there," she agreed. "And then what? Do we stay and confront them, or do we leave before they arrive?" Nathaniel considered this, his brow furrowed in thought. "If we run now, we look guilty of something. They'll use it against us in any legal battle for Lily." He met her eyes. "I think we face Thomas openly, but we should have a backup plan if things turn dangerous." They spent the next hour preparing, hiding the medical records in Emma's room, packing essential supplies in Nathaniel's wagon, and concealing it in the barn, ready for a quick escape, and moving Lily to a safer bedroom at the back of the house, where she would be farthest from any potential confrontation. As they worked, Adelaide found herself watching Nathaniel, the careful way he checked his rifle without glorifying the weapon, how he moved through the house, securing doors and windows, the gentle hands that had carved a wooden horse for Lily, now preparing to defend them all. In the span of a few days, this man had become the center of their world, a protector and ally when the rest of society had turned its back. When there was nothing left to prepare, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the winter sky. The night was eerily beautiful, crystal clear, and bitterly cold, with the snow reflecting the starlight, like scattered diamonds across the landscape. "I'm sorry," Nathaniel said suddenly, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "I never wanted to drag you and Lily into my fight with the mine." Adelaide shook her head. "It was our fight, too, from the moment Joshua died. I just didn't know it yet." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "What do you think will happen if we win? If we expose what the company has been doing?" Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, contemplating. The mine might close, at least temporarily. Many in Riverbend would lose their livelihoods. His jaw tightened. But men would stop dying from poisoned air. Children wouldn't grow up without fathers. That has to be worth something. "It's worth everything," Adelaide said softly. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind. "And after? What happens after the fight is over, one way or another?" He turned to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting the starlight. "What would you want to happen?" Adelaide felt her heart beating faster. "I don't know," she admitted. "3 days ago I was just trying to keep Lily alive. I couldn't think beyond the next meal, the next night's shelter." She met his gaze steadily. "But now I find myself thinking of the future again, hoping for things I thought were lost to me forever." Nathaniel's expression softened vulnerability, replacing the grim determination that had marked his features all evening. "I've been alone for 6 years," he said quietly. "Thought I deserved to be after failing to save Mary and Emma. Didn't think I had the right to hope for anything more." His large hand moved across the space between them, coming to rest beside hers on the porch railing, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel its warmth. "Until I saw you and Lily in that store, and something inside me that had been dead for a long time, suddenly wasn't anymore." Adelaide's breath caught in her throat at the naked honesty in his words. Slowly, deliberately, she moved her hand the last inch separating them, letting her fingers rest lightly on his. "Nathaniel." The sound of approaching horses cut off whatever she had been about to say. They both stood scanning the darkness beyond the ranch's boundaries. In the distance, moving along the snow-covered road, were the unmistakable shapes of riders, at least 4 or 5 making no attempt to conceal their approach. "They're here," Nathaniel said grimly, his hand slipping away from hers as he reached for the rifle he had propped against the porch railing. "Go inside, check on Lily. I'll meet them out here." Adelaide wanted to protest, to insist on standing beside him, but she knew her first responsibility was to her daughter. She nodded once, squeezing his arm briefly before slipping inside the house. Lily was still asleep in the back bedroom, her small face peaceful despite the danger approaching. Adelaide brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, then moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see the yard. Nathaniel stood on the porch rifle, held not quite at the ready, but clearly visible as the riders approached. They stopped at the edge of the yard, 5 men on horseback silhouetted against the snowy landscape. One dismounted and stepped forward into the pool of light cast by the porch lantern. Thomas Hayes was a thinner, sharper version of Joshua, same height and coloring, but lacking the kindness that had always softened her husband's features. Even from a distance, Adelaide could see the cold calculation in his eyes as he faced Nathaniel. "Redwood," Thomas called his voice, carrying in the still night air. "Bit late for a social call, isn't it?" "Since when do you make social calls, Hayes?" Nathaniel replied, his voice steady. "Sheriff said you'd be coming tomorrow morning." Thomas shrugged, an exaggerated gesture visible even from Adelaide's vantage point. "Thought I'd save everyone the wait." Where's my sister-in-law and my niece? Safe inside, Nathaniel said. And they'll stay that way. Thomas laughed a sound without humor. Don't tell me the rumors are true. The mad doctor and the widow. He shook his head. That's going to make things easier for me in court. No judge is going to let a child stay in such an inappropriate situation. The only inappropriate thing here, Nathaniel said evenly, is a man showing up at night with armed companions to threaten a woman and child. Thomas's expression hardened. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm here to claim my legal rights as Lily's uncle and closest male relative. He pulled a folded document from his coat. I have the papers right here signed by Judge Morrison himself. Convenient, Nathaniel observed. The same judge who dismissed my evidence against the mining company 6 years ago. The same judge who happens to own shares in the Blue River Mine. Thomas's face flushed with anger, visible even in the dim light. You're still pushing that nonsense. The fever took your family redwood, not the mine. Just like it took many others. You couldn't save them as a doctor, so you had to invent a conspiracy to ease your guilt. Adelaide had heard enough. She slipped out of the bedroom, checking once more that Lily was asleep, then made her way to the front of the house. She took a deep breath to steady herself, then opened the door and stepped onto the porch beside Nathaniel. That's enough, Thomas, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I know why you're really here, and it has nothing to do with concern for Lily. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he took her in. Adelaide, you're looking well for a woman who was supposedly starving in the streets a few days ago. No thanks to you, she replied coldly. Where were you 3 months ago when your brother died? Where were you when the company threw us out of our home, when Lily was crying from hunger? I came as soon as I heard you were in trouble, Thomas claimed, but his eyes shifted away from hers, unable to meet her direct gaze. Lies, Adelaide said flatly. You came because the company sent you, because they're afraid of what I might discover about how Joshua really died. She saw his expression flicker, confirming her suspicions. Did they pay you well, Thomas? How much was your brother's justice worth? One of the men behind Thomas moved his horse forward, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. Adelaide recognized him with a start. James Porter, the mining company's manager, a man she had met only a few times during company functions when Joshua was alive. That's enough, Mrs. Hayes, Porter said, his voice hard with authority. These wild accusations aren't helping your case. If you were a responsible mother, you'd be grateful that your brother-in-law is willing to take on the burden of raising your child given your unstable situation. Nathaniel shifted subtly, positioning himself slightly in front of Adelaide, the rifle still held at his side but ready. The only unstable situation here is a mining operation that values profit over human lives, he said, his deep voice carrying across the yard. How many more men have to die before someone holds the company accountable? Porter's face darkened with anger. We've heard enough of your slander over the years, Redwood. It didn't stand up to scrutiny then, and it won't now. He nodded to the men with him. Thomas has legal custody papers. We're here to ensure the peaceful transfer of the child to her rightful guardian. Legal papers obtained through lies and bribery, Adelaide said, stepping forward, despite Nathaniel's protective stance. Joshua wouldn't want his daughter raised by a man who betrayed him for money. Thomas flinched, the first sign that some part of him still had a conscience. You don't know what you're talking about, Adelaide. I'm doing what's best for Lily. Best for Lily? Adelaide's voice rose with incredulous anger. She nearly died on the streets while you were collecting blood money from the company that killed her father. A heavy silence fell over the yard. Even Porter looked taken aback by the directness of her accusation. You have no proof of that, he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "But I do," came a new voice from the darkness beyond the yard. All heads turned as another rider emerged from the shadows. Sheriff Maxwell alone this time, his expression grim as he guided his horse into the circle of light. "Sheriff," Porter acknowledged stiffly, "this is a private matter. Thomas Hayes is here to claim legal guardianship of his niece." Maxwell dismounted, moving to stand in the space between the two opposing groups. "Is that so strange time of night for such business?" He looked at Thomas. "Especially since I specifically told you to come in the morning, Hayes." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "We thought it best to resolve this quickly." "With armed men," Maxwell nodded toward the visible weapons carried by Porter and the others. "Seems excessive for collecting a 4-year-old girl." Porter's patience visibly thinned. "Sheriff, you know as well as I do that Redwood has been causing trouble for the company for years. We anticipated resistance." "Resistance to lawful custody," Maxwell raised an eyebrow. "Or resistance to something else?" He reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded document. "Like this report I found buried in the county records office this afternoon, detailing dangerous conditions in Section 7 of the mine, the same section where Joshua Hayes was working before he died." Adelaide gasped, her eyes flying to Nathaniel's. Had his lawyer friend in Denver come through after all? Porter's face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" "Let's just say someone prompted me to look more closely at the official records," Maxwell said, his eyes briefly meeting Nathaniel's. "Seems the county medical examiner raised concerns about several miners' deaths, including Hayes's. Concerns that were suppressed by order of the mining company." He turned to Thomas. "And your signature appears on one of those suppression orders, Hayes. Care to explain why you'd help cover up the circumstances of your own brother's death?" All eyes turned to Thomas, whose face had gone ashen in the lantern light. I didn't know what I was signing," he stammered. "Porter said it was just routine paperwork, that Joshua's widow and child would be taken care of if I helped smooth things over." "Liar," Porter hissed. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You took the money willingly enough." The unified front between the men was crumbling rapidly, accusations flying as each tried to save himself. Adelaide watched in stunned disbelief as years of deception unraveled before her eyes. Sheriff Maxwell let them argue for a moment, then raised his hand for silence. "Enough. I've heard sufficient to know something's badly wrong here." He turned to Porter. "I'll be conducting a full investigation into conditions at the mine and the company's role in concealing them. Starting tomorrow." Porter's face contorted with rage. "You can't do that. The mine is the lifeblood of River Bend. Do you know how many people will lose their jobs if it's shut down? Do you know how many have already lost their lives because of your negligence?" Nathaniel countered, speaking for the first time since the sheriff's arrival. "How many widows and orphans have been created so the company could save money on proper ventilation?" Maxwell nodded solemnly. "Redwood's right. If the mine is unsafe, it needs to be fixed before more men die." He turned to Thomas. "As for you, Hayes, these custody papers were obtained under false pretenses. I'm confiscating them pending investigation into your relationship with the mining company." Thomas looked panicked. "You can't do that." "Can't do? I'm her uncle, her blood relation. Blood doesn't always make family," the sheriff said with a significant glance toward Nathaniel and Adelaide standing together on the porch. "Besides, I've yet to see any evidence that you have Lily's best interests at heart." As if summoned by the mention of her name, the front door creaked open again, and Lily appeared, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Mama," she called, her small voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. "Is everything okay?" Adelaide turned immediately, gathering her daughter into her arms. "Everything's fine, my love. These men were just leaving." Lily looked over her mother's shoulder at the assembled group, her eyes quickly finding Thomas among them. She shrank back against Adelaide. "That's him, Mama," she whispered, though her voice carried in the still night air. "The man with the angry eyes. The one Emma said took money to hurt Papa." Thomas blanched his gaze, darting between Lily and Nathaniel. "What is this? What have you been telling the child about me?" "Nothing," Adelaide said truthfully. "Lily has never seen you before tonight." She held her daughter closer. "But children see things adults often miss." A strange silence fell over the yard. Even Porter seemed unsettled by the child's words, his certainty visibly wavering. Sheriff Maxwell was the first to recover. "I think we're done here for tonight, gentlemen. Hayes Porter, I'll expect to see you both in my office tomorrow morning to discuss these allegations further." His tone left no room for argument. "The rest of you go home. Consider yourselves lucky I'm not arresting anyone for trespassing and intimidation." For a moment it seemed Porter might protest, but something in Maxwell's stance, or perhaps in the way Nathaniel held his rifle with quiet confidence, changed his mind. With a curt nod, he turned his horse, gesturing for his men to follow. Thomas lingered, his eyes fixed on Lily. "She's my niece," he said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. "My blood." "You should have remembered that when you took the company's money," Adelaide said quietly. "Go home, Thomas. If you truly care about Lily, help the sheriff uncover the truth about what happened to Joshua. That would be worth more than any guardianship claim." Thomas looked as if he might say more, but in the end, he simply turned and mounted his horse, following Porter and the others back down the snowy road toward town. Sheriff Maxwell watched them go, then turned back to the three figures on the porch. "You should know," he said quietly, "this isn't over. The mine has powerful friends in the county government, including Judge Morrison. They won't give up easily." Nathaniel nodded, finally lowering his rifle now that the immediate danger had passed. "We know, but neither will we." Maxwell studied them for a long moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "You know, when I came out here yesterday, I had my doubts about this arrangement." His eyes moved from Nathaniel to Adelaide and Lily. "But seeing you tonight, how you stood together against those men," he shook his head. "Maybe there's something to be said for family that's chosen rather than born." With that, he tipped his hat, mounted his horse, and rode off into the darkness, leaving the three of them alone on the porch. As soon as he was gone, Adelaide felt her knees weaken with the release of tension. Nathaniel was there immediately, his arm steady around her shoulders, as he guided her and Lily back inside the warmth of the house. "Is it really over, Mama?" Lily asked as they settled in front of the fire, the child nestled between Adelaide and Nathaniel on the sofa. Adelaide stroked her daughter's hair. "Not completely, my love. But we're safe for tonight." Nathaniel added another log to the fire, the flames leaping higher to chase away the winter chill. "The sheriff is on our side now," he said, his deep voice reassuring. "That changes everything." Adelaide looked at him over Lily's head. "Why did he help us? I thought he was loyal to the mining company, like everyone else in Riverbend." Nathaniel's expression was thoughtful. "Maxwell was always different from the others. His father died in the mine when he was young. I treated his mother before she passed a few years back." A slight smile touched his lips. "Perhaps he's been waiting for a reason to question the company's power all along." Lily yawned, her small body relaxing as the fear and excitement of the night faded. "Emma says he's a good man," she murmured sleepily. "She says he'll help us." Adelaide and Nathaniel exchanged a look over the child's head, still uncertain what to make of Lily's continued references to Emma, but no longer able to dismiss them as mere imagination. Too many of her dreams had proven accurate. As Lily drifted back to sleep between them, Adelaide found herself studying Nathaniel's profile in the firelight. This man, who had been a stranger just days ago, now felt as essential to her world as the air she breathed. He had risked everything to protect her and Lily, standing against the power of the mining company and the judgment of the entire town. "What happens now?" she asked softly, careful not to wake Lily. Nathaniel turned to meet her gaze, his gray eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Now we continue the fight. Maxwell will investigate, but Porter and his allies won't make it easy. There will be pressure from the company attempts to discredit us." His expression softened. "It won't be a simple path, Adelaide." "I'm not afraid," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Not anymore." His large hand found hers where it rested on the sofa beside the sleeping Lily, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers in a silent promise. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The following weeks brought both challenges and unexpected allies. True to his word, Sheriff Maxwell began a thorough investigation into conditions at the Blue River mine. The initial inspection revealed dangerous levels of coal dust and toxic gases in several sections, particularly in Section 7, where Joshua had worked. "The air quality readings are worse than I imagined," Maxwell confided to Nathaniel and Adelaide one evening at the ranch. "Men working 8-hour shifts in those conditions, it's criminal negligence." When the company attempted to block his efforts, claiming the investigation was disrupting operations, Maxwell stood firm. "I've got testimonies from 15 miners with respiratory problems," he told Porter during a tense meeting that Adelaide attended. "And medical records from 3 neighboring counties showing similar patterns. You can cooperate now or face formal charges later." Faced with mounting evidence, the company reluctantly allowed inspectors into the mine. Nathaniel was deputized specifically for the medical aspects of the investigation, his expertise and meticulous records from years earlier proving invaluable. "They're trying to discredit you," Adelaide warned one night after Lily was asleep. "I heard Martha Pierce telling people you're obsessed, that you're using me and Lily to continue your vendetta." Nathaniel took her hands in his. "Let them talk. The truth speaks louder than gossip." And speak it did. As spring thawed, the Mountain Pass's news reporters from Denver arrived, drawn by rumors of the growing scandal. Their articles exposing the dangerous conditions and company cover-ups forced state mining officials to take notice. Adelaide, once invisible to the townspeople, found her voice as she organized the miners' widows. She arranged a meeting at the church expecting resistance, but was surprised when Reverend Collins offered his full support. "My brother worked that mine for 20 years, he explained. "Died of consumption last year. I've suspected for a long time it was more than that." Thomas Hayes disappeared from Riverbend the day after the confrontation at the ranch, taking the company's blood money with him. His custody claim was formally withdrawn through a Denver lawyer, leaving Lily securely in Adelaide's care. In late March, the county commissioners issued their first ruling ordering the Blue River mine to suspend operations in sections 5 through 9 until proper ventilation could be installed. Porter fought it bitterly, warning of economic ruin for the town. "Better temporary hardship than more widows and orphans," Sheriff Maxwell responded at the town meeting. "The mine can reopen when it's safe, not before." The battle wasn't over. Lawsuits were filed, threats were made, but the momentum had shifted. When the first compensation payments were ordered for families of miners whose deaths were linked to poor air quality, Adelaide felt a bittersweet vindication. "Joshua would be proud," Nathaniel told her as they reviewed the official report together. "His death forced changes that will save lives." As winter gave way to spring, The Redwood Ranch became a center of quiet resistance against the mining company's power. Miners' families would gather there on Sundays, sharing meals and stories, finding strength in their collective voice. Adelaide moved through these gatherings with quiet confidence, serving coffee, and listening to concerns helping craft letters to county officials and newspapers in Denver. Lily blossomed in this environment, her nightmares fading as she spent her days helping Nathaniel with the animals and exploring the ranch. She still occasionally mentioned conversations with Emma, but these references became less frequent and lost their ominous tone. "Emma says she doesn't need to stay anymore," Lily announced one morning at breakfast. "She says we're safe now." Adelaide and Nathaniel exchanged looks of wonder and relief. Whether Emma's presence had been real or imagined, the healing it represented for all of them was undeniable. Through it all, Adelaide watched as Nathaniel slowly emerged from the shell of grief that had encased him for 6 years. With each passing day, his smile came more easily, his laugh grew stronger, especially when Lily was around. The little girl had claimed a special place in his heart, following him around the ranch as he worked, asking endless questions about the animals, the river, the changing seasons. It was Lily who finally asked the question that had been growing between them. "Mama," she said one evening, as Nathaniel taught her to play checkers, "are we going to stay here forever with Papa Nathaniel?" The title she gave him, so naturally, so easily, brought tears to both adults' eyes. That night, after Lily was asleep, they sat on the porch, under the stars, talking of futures that had once seemed impossible. One evening in early April, as the last snow melted and the first wildflowers began to appear along the banks of the Blue River. Their wedding was held on the ranch in early summer, a simple ceremony attended by the miners' families who had become their friends and allies in the fight against the company. Sheriff Maxwell stood as witness, his official presence a pointed reminder of how much had changed in River Bend. As Adelaide and Nathaniel spoke their vows beneath the oak tree, with Lily beaming at their side, the wildflowers Emma had loved bloomed in profusion around them. The Blue River flowed steadily past its waters, catching the sunlight like scattered gold, a reminder that life, like the river, continued to move forward, carrying them all toward a future bright with promise and possibility. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the ranch, Adelaide stood at the kitchen window, watching as Nathaniel taught Lily to ride her new pony in the pasture. Her hand rested on her stomach, where the first stirrings of new life had just begun to make themselves known, a secret she planned to share with her new husband that night. Lily's laughter carried across the yard, pure and joyful, the sound of a child who knew she was completely and unconditionally loved. "Look, Mama," she called, noticing Adelaide at the window. "Look at me ride behind her." Nathaniel's steady hands ensured her safety, his face alight with the pride and love of a father. He looked up, catching Adelaide's eye, and the smile they shared held all the words they didn't need to say aloud. The woman who had once counted 12 copper cents with desperate shaking hands now counted blessings that seemed infinite. She had learned that sometimes the most dangerous choice, trusting a stranger's kindness, becomes the very thing that saves your life. And as the river flowed on, carrying away the last shadows of grief and fear, Adelaide Redwood stepped out into the twilight to join her family, her heart full with the certainty that this was not the end of their story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter, one they would write together, day by day, season by season, for all the years to come.